Hi guys, thanks so much for coming in the cold weather. My name is Anna. I'm a fourth year engineering science student, and the goals for my talk today are to talk not only about what successes I've had in my internship experience, but also failures. The lessons I've learned from those failures. I want to give you tangible tools, and as this is such a small group of people, I want you to be able to ask questions throughout. So if anything I say is unclear, just raise your hand. I'm happy to answer questions. So I wanted to start by taking you back to my second year. I just came back from my PUI, so I'm in my fifth year of school right now. And going into second year, I had decided that I really wanted to work in finance. And I also knew that a large part of working in finance was networking. And a lot of people will tell you throughout your life that you need to network to get to the positions you want, but they won't tell you how to network. So that's why I wanted to go through this demo, and I think that this is probably the most important thing you'll take from today. So the rest of it is more about me personally, but this is actually like an important tool. So I started by going to Google, and because I wanted to work in finance, I would go U of T, engineering, science, finance, LinkedIn. And so, for example, I might look at who is someone who looks like they, here. I'm just skipping these people because I know these people. Here's an example of somebody, I have to join. I'll sign in. Don't think that's my password. So here's an example of someone I might decide that I want to network with. I see here right now that, let's assume he's full-time. He's an analyst at autotrader.ca, and I decide that I want to work at autotrader.ca. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to look at autotrader.ca. I'm going to find out how their email addresses are structured. Some people try to reach out to people directly on LinkedIn, but I find that's usually not effective because you don't have professionals checking their LinkedIn all the time, whereas if you send it to their work email, they'll have everything sent while they're in the office, while they're working. So I might look at autotrader.ca, email, address, format. And I can see here that the domain name is @trader.ca. So some things I can try, going back to Gideon, are his first name dot last name at autotrader.ca. I can try his first initial last name at autotrader.ca, and there's a whole bunch of different email address formats that I can piece together using his name and his company. Another one that is a more concrete example of what it looks like is if I go to, let's say I really wanted to work at Goldman Sachs, this being finance. And the reason I like to search U of T is because I find it's easier to ask alumni for phone chats. We'll talk about how you reach out to them after, but this is just how you find their email address, the first step. So U of T, Goldman Sachs, LinkedIn. I see here, Grace Guo. She's an associate at Goldman Sachs. And Goldman Sachs is a big company. So if I look at Goldman Sachs, email address format, I can see here that most often is first dot last name at gs.com. So in this case, her email address is almost certainly grace.guo at gs.com. So what I want to do next is send an email to her, just in the title being very clear what I'm looking for. I'm looking to talk to you about your experience. I'm interested in working in finance. I'm not necessarily trying to get a job, but I want to learn more about what is your day-to-day like, how did you get here, and in the hopes that if I talk to her and I show that I'm keen and she decides she likes me, she might decide to connect me with somebody else. So in my email addresses, I usually ask them, do you have 15 minutes for a phone call? If they're in Toronto, it's easy to ask if they want to meet for coffee, and it's easier to make a good impression in person. But for example, if I'm reaching out to somebody who's in Hong Kong at the moment, a phone call is all they have time for. And I think you'll find once you start working, it's very easy to say yes, to give up 15 minutes of your time to talk to someone. People usually like talking about themselves. So most people that I reached out to actually said yes. I tried to reaching out to people on LinkedIn, and that wasn't as successful just because like the LinkedIn emails usually would go to a different filter in the mailbox. But when I tried looking at their email address straight to their work email, it would pop up while they're in the office working on some other task. Here's an excuse to take a 15-minute break while still working, and so they said yes. So I talked to a whole bunch of people this way. I usually started out by just asking them how they got to where they are today. I never asked, how do I get a job from you? Because that's not why they do these chats. But I also found that once I started applying for jobs there, it was really helpful to reference the things that we had talked about in our chats. So I talked to someone at Scotiabank, for example, and he said that he really liked how his team, when they teach you something, they don't just tell you what to do, they tell you why you do it. So in my cover letter to Scotiabank, I can reference that. I can show that I've done my due diligence, I've researched your company, I've talked to someone on the team I'm interested in working in, and this is now why I'm interested in working there, and it's a more compelling argument. So I went through a whole bunch of these. I didn't actually end up getting a job this way, but I will say that it helped me be a lot more comfortable in other networking sessions. It taught me that it's easy to make conversation with other people if you just ask them about themselves. And so in third year later on, these skills all came in handy. So even if you don't get results from it right away, it's still a super useful thing to do. And especially if you guys are in first or second year, I think now's a great time to start building up your arsenal. And by the time you're in third year and companies decide that we really like third years, then you have all this experience doing the networking. So going back to, I mentioned that I didn't end up working in finance. How do I play from this slide? Oh, here, present. Yeah, so I got an interview with CPPIB, and during my interview, they showed me this photo. The S&P 500 is a collection of stocks. Anybody who's interested in working in finance should know what it is. I looked at this photo and I had no idea what it was. And so the biggest lesson learned from my interview here was to be prepared. Whenever you even apply for a job, I think it's helpful to start looking at what type of questions the interviewers might ask you, look more into the field, because a lot of times the notification between, hey, you've got an interview, can you come in to interview tomorrow? There's only so much that you can learn in one day. So start preparing early and prepare very thoroughly. So my second year did not end up working in finance, did not end up working at CPPIB. I got referred to Pivotal. I was a part of Your Next Career Network at the time, and the president had reached out to me to ask me what were my plans for the summer, told him I didn't have anything lined up. He asked me would I be interested in working where he worked. He was happy to refer me. And I think the reasons he was happy to refer me were, if you follow these 3 lessons, be kind. I was nice to everyone at YNCN, and I don't think he would have referred me if he didn't like me. Put your heart into what you do, and I think this one I emphasize a lot later on as well. Anytime you're involved in a student club, there's no accountability. Like, you could do a really bad job, and they're not going to fire you. Like, it's a student club, right? But the better a job you do, the more people within the club are usually willing to stick their necks out for you. In this case, even though I didn't get any direct reward out of YNCN, I was doing logistics for the career fair that year. Like, I didn't get paid for it. I didn't have to show up at 5 a.m. on the day of to set up. I didn't have to do a lot of things I did. But by doing so, I had someone who could recognize that, hey, I'm working hard. I'm committed to what I do, and so I think you'll do a good job here. And then that follows from getting involved within school. So then PY at RBC. That's how I got my second year internship. I was friendly with the outgoing PY students, and this is something that I didn't think would help me at the time. And it kind of goes back to just being kind to a lot of people, because you don't realize how people will help you later on. When I came to this position, I learned that the outgoing PY interns actually screen resumes for the incoming PY interns. So because I was on good terms with the people who were outgoing, when they saw my name, they could say, hey, like I've talked to her before, she's a good person, she seems like she has a good work ethic just based on her reputation, let's give her an interview. And this time, unlike previously with CPPIB, I over-prepared for the finance portion of the interview. I subscribed to a bunch of finance newsletters. I tried to read Wall Street article journals. I made sure that I read on conditions of the market and was prepared to talk about my view of the market. And I actually didn't end up getting asked any of these questions in finance, but the fact that I had prepared for it meant that if someone were to surprise me, that wouldn't be the reason I didn't get the job. Then during my PY, I actually realized maybe 4 months in, I didn't like finance, which is a little bit disappointing because I spent all the second year trying to get involved in finance. But that's why I think internships are great, not only at teaching you what you like, but also what you don't like. And despite not necessarily liking the job, going to the point earlier about being committed and putting your heart into what you do, I still took a lot of responsibility for my projects. I still made sure everything was done on time, still made sure I did a good job with it, went the extra mile where I could, and as a result, I got increasing responsibility, I got bigger projects, I got more hard projects, and that meant that when it came to my interviews later on, I had more to talk about. I could talk about a really complex challenge in predicting different index rebalances, and this is a responsibility that I don't think I would have gotten if I hadn't been as committed. So it's good because not only do you get the increasing responsibility and things to talk about later on, you also get exposure to a lot of different people. So actually after I finished my PY with RBC, my team offered me a spot back, but somebody else who was starting a new team, who I had worked with as a result of this PY, also offered me a spot. So just being on good terms with people and taking pride in your work gives you a reputation that leads to more opportunities. And they usually won't happen where you expect it. I didn't make sure that I did a good job with this one specific person because I thought they were going to start a new team, but I just made sure I did a good job with anyone who gave me a project, and as a result, this materialized. So my PY at RBC was 12 months. Last summer was my internship with Apple, and I think that's probably what got people to come in here because Apple doesn't recruit at UC much. And so how I got an offer from Apple was I attended the Grace Hopper conference. It's a conference for women in computer science, and there are scholarships every year that companies will sponsor. So I applied for a scholarship from Accenture, and I heard of this scholarship by being involved. I had done one of their programs previously, so I got the email about the scholarship, and I applied for it because I wanted, as I said, to shoot all my shots. I didn't lose anything except my time for applying for it. I didn't realize it was how competitive it would be, but I thought that if anything happens, I could always reuse the essays. And so I ended up getting the scholarship. I ended up getting flown to Orlando for the conference, and there, Apple was having, they had their own booth. So when I was at Apple, I was an engineering project management intern, and what that means is that I'm responsible for making sure the project gets done. I'm not an engineer, I'm not building it, I'm not a designer. My job is not necessary for the product to actually ship, but without me, it's a lot harder for it to ship on schedule. I like to call myself the babysitter of the product because whenever things happen, I'm the one who fixes them, and I just make sure that I will do whatever is needed to make sure that the feature ships on time. So I walked into the conference, I saw Apple's sign, and me, even though I know that I don't like coding, and I didn't think that I would ever become like a software engineer at Apple, I thought I might as well check it out, going back to shooting all shots. I learned that they had this position called project management, and I thought, hey, that sounds like something that similar to what I did at RBC, where I had to manage a lot of different projects at once. I had to work with a lot of different people. I made sure that they knew information, and I knew that them being at Grace Hopper meant that they were prioritizing hiring females. So I went there and I told them about myself, and they're like, okay, cool, see you. So I decided that wasn't enough. I went back the next day, talked to the exact same person, sold myself harder, and then asked how I could position myself best for an interview. And I think this is something that you need to approach with tact, because a lot of times if you just straight up ask for an interview, they might get turned off by that prospect. But I knew that this was a career fair. I knew that they were here to hire. I knew that they were doing on-site interviews. And I felt that if I had the chance to interview with someone, I would be able to sell myself better. And so she said, like, I've talked to you 2 days now. Come back on the last day if you're still interested. So I go early the last day, show up, make sure I talk to the same person, even if I have to wait in a very, very long line. And she sees I'm very dedicated to this. Obviously, I'm very interested. Here's an interview. And then once you get the interview, I mean, that's a method. That's just a product of preparing for it. I hadn't brought my laptop to the conference, so that evening I actually went to the hotel lobby, did a whole bunch of research, printed everything out, and then just studied from paper. So I did okay on the on-site interview, well enough to receive phone interviews. For each of the phone interviews, I prepared, and for whatever type of interview you receive, there's a lot of resources online to prepare. Made sure that I wouldn't get caught off guard by any unexpected questions, and received the offer following 3 additional phone interviews. And very, very grateful for that opportunity, but I also know that it wouldn't have happened if I hadn't been that extra during the conference. So don't be afraid to go the extra mile. Post-grad, my plans are I'll be at McKinsey in the Digital Toronto office, and the lessons learned here are keeping your options open. I didn't think that I would be interested here. They came to campus maybe 3 years ago, so I've been in touch with them for 3 years now. And it would have been very easy to dismiss them and say, you know, I really like tech, so I think I want to focus on this for now. But by keeping an open mind, I was able to chat with a lot of people, learn about the really fascinating work they do, and yeah, I decided that I think that's a better fit for me, starting out in my career. So kind of to wrap up themes from this talk, and we'll open it to questions, are when you put your heart into what you do, you receive referrals, you receive extra responsibilities, and you do a good job all around. When you go the extra mile, you stand out. And when you're kind, people like you, and everything nowadays is your relationship with other people, so I think that's important. You also reap good karma, so if you're not doing it for the sake of being kind, do it because you know that it will come back to help you out in some other way in the future. Yeah, any questions? Thank you guys for listening to that rambling rant. Any questions?
Yeah. So kind of wondering about, like, you said to prepare for the interview, like what kind of things you would go search online to like get prepared?
That's a good question. When I was preparing, so it depended on the type of interview. When I was preparing for the finance interviews, I mentioned I read different articles, different journals, and tried to look at what was the view of the market right now. When I prepared for product management interviews, I actually didn't know how to prepare. So I reached out to friends who had interned as PMs previously. I asked them to point me to, hey, like if I do a Google search, there's a lot of different results. Can you tell me what's the most relevant? They would usually give me a few websites, and looking through those websites, you usually get a better idea of, okay, these are the skills I need. So now what can I read online to help me get those skills? For product management, for example, there are a few really good books out there. So I skimmed those books as much as I could. There's also like a different website that gives you practice interview questions. So I would read the interview questions and then rehearse my response to those. And then reading more about what the job of being a product manager was like, so that I can imagine these are the skills you need. Here's how I think they might test me for those.